Elias Thorne didn't believe in ghosts, but the wind in the Black Hills had a way of screaming like it remembered every soul that ever froze in the timber. It was late October, the kind of night where the sky turns the color of a bruised plum and the air tastes like iron. Elias was in the barn, rubbing down his mare, his joints atching with familiar, dull rhythm. He'd lived alone on this patch of dirt for 10 years, ever since the fever took Martha, and the world went gray. He had his horse, his hounds, and a solitude that sat on his shoulders like a heavy wool coat. Then the hound went quiet. They didn't bark. They didn't growl. They just whined, low and deep in their throats, and backed into the shadows of the stalls. Elias reached for the Winchester, leaning against the hay bale. His thumb found the hammer. He didn't breathe. Out here, silence was usually followed by blood. He heard it then, a sound that didn't belong to the wild. Not the snap of a branch or the huff of a bear. It was a sob, ragged, wet, the sound of a person who had run until their lungs were full of glass and their heart had nowhere left to go. The rain was coming down now, cold enough to turn to sleet. He swept the darkness with his gaze until he saw her. She was huddled against the base of his well house, a shadow among shadows. She wasn't wearing a coat, just a thin, white dress that was plastered to her skin, stained dark with mud and something thicker than water. "Easy now," Elias said. His voice was like gravel rubbing together. He hadn't used it much lately. "I ain't gonna hurt you." The girl flinched so hard she struck her head against the stones. She didn't scream. She just curled into a ball, trying to make herself small enough to disappear into the earth. Elias saw her hands. They were raw, the fingernails torn to quick as if she'd been climbing rock faces in the dark. Are you getting along with this story? Let me know in the comment section. With an emoji, let's continue. She didn't move until he reached out a hand. Then she looked up. Her eyes were wide, the pupils blown out with terror, looking like two holes burnt in a sheet. She saw something in his face, maybe the same exhaustion he saw in hers, and she let him help her up. She was light, too light, like a bird with broken wings. He led her into the cabin. The warmth of the wood stove hit them like a physical weight. Elias didn't ask her name. He didn't ask where she'd come from. He just pointed to the chair by the fire and went to the kitchen to fetch a blanket. When he returned, she was shivering so hard her teeth were rattling. He draped the heavy quilt over her shoulders. She clutched it, her knuckles white. "You're bleeding," Elias said, noticing the dark patch spreading across the back of her dress. She stiffened. She pulled the blanket tighter, a look of pure, unadulterated shame washing over her face. "Don't," she whispered. Her voice was a ghost of a thing. "Please don't look. I'm ashamed." "Nothing to be ashamed of in a wound, girl. I've seen enough of them to last 3 lifetimes." "Not like this," she sobbed, her head dropping. "You'll see what they did. You'll see I'm property." Elias felt a coldness in his gut that had nothing to do with the Dakota wind. He reached for the brass lantern on the table. He trimmed the wick, the yellow light blooming and stretching the shadows against the log walls. He walked over, slow and steady, the way you approach a horse that's been whipped too many times. "Hold this," he said, handing her the blanket's edge, gently, with fingers that had untied 1,000 knots. He moved the wet fabric of her dress away from her shoulder. He lifted the lantern high. The light hit her skin, and Elias Thorne's heart stopped. It wasn't a wound from a fall. It wasn't a scrape from the brush. It was a brand, deep, puckered, and angry. It was a letter V intertwined with a snake. But beneath it, there was a ledger of scars, lines of text, names, dates, etched into her flesh with a hot iron. Someone had tried to turn her back into a map of her own suffering. Someone had tried to write their own history over her soul. Elias stumbled back, the lantern trembling in his hand. He'd seen the horrors of the wilderness. He'd seen men blown apart by canister shot. But he'd never... Before we find out if Elias Thorne can protect Sarah from the storm that's coming, take a moment to look at your own surroundings. What time is it where you're watching this? Tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from. And if this story is touching something in you, that feeling that no one should ever be owned, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It helps more folks find these stories of the Old West. Now, pour yourself another cup of coffee, because the real trouble is just riding up the lane. 3 days passed. The kind of days that feel like a truce in a war you know isn't over. Sarah didn't talk much. She spent her time staring at the fire or watching the horizon through the small, greased paper window. She helped Elias mend a harness. Her fingers surprisingly nimble despite the raw wounds. They shared meals in a silence that wasn't heavy anymore. It was a quiet that let a person breathe. Elias watched her. He saw the way she flinched at the sound of the hounds. He saw the way she gripped the handle of the kitchen knife when the wind rattled the shutters. He didn't cut wood. He didn't check the traps. He spent his mornings in the barn, cleaning his old Remington and sharpening a Bowie knife that hadn't seen the light of day since the war. He knew Silas Vane. Vane was a man who didn't like to lose his investments. He was a man who used the law like a leash and his wealth like a muzzle. Elias said. His voice was flat, emotionless. The trapdoor under the rug. Don't make a sound, even if you hear the house come down around your ears. Elias, don't, she pleaded. He'll kill you. He'll burn the ranch. Many have tried, Elias said, his eyes fixing on the door. Most are buried in places no one visits. Get down. Now. She moved with the desperation of a hunted deer, slipping into the dark crawl space. Elias pulled the rug over the door, then sat back down at the table. He placed a Remington across his lap. He didn't light a lamp. He just waited for the moon to do its work. The hoofbeats came slow, arrogant. 3 horses, maybe 4. They stopped in the yard, the leather of the saddles creaking in the cold air. Thorne, a voice called out. It was a polished voice, a voice that belonged in a bank or a courtroom. I know you're in there, Elias. I saw the smoke from the ridge. You've always been a man of habit. Elias didn't answer. He watched the door handle. I'm missing something of mine. The voice continued. Silas Vane, a little stray that wandered off my porch. Word is she was headed this way. Now, I don't want any trouble with a war hero like yourself. Just hand her over, and I'll forget I ever saw your tracks near my camp. Elias stood up. He walked to the door and threw it open. The moonlight spilled into the room, hitting the barrel of his rifle. Silas Vane sat atop a black stallion, flanked by 2 men who looked like they'd been hired for their lack of a conscience. Vane was wearing a fur-lined coat and a Stetson that cost more than Elias's entire ranch. You're trespassing, Silas, Elias said. Vane smirked. I'm reclaiming property. Elias, there's a difference. That girl represents a $3,000 debt. You want to pay it? Or do you want to play the martyr for a girl who's already been branded as a thief? I don't see no girl, Elias said. All I see is 3 men who are about 5 seconds away from finding out what a... Vane's smile faded. He shifted in his saddle, his hand drifting toward the silver-plated revolver at his hip. You're a fool, Thorne. You're protecting a ghost. She's already broken. What do you think you're going to find in her? Love? A family? She's a map of my ownership. Every time you look at her, you'll see my name. No, Elias said. Every time I look at her, I see a soul that you couldn't kill. And that's what scares you, Silas. You can mark the skin, but you can't own the spirit. Now, get off my land before the dogs get fed. The man to Vane's left drew fast. He was a professional, but Elias Thorne had been trained by the hell of Virginia. Elias didn't aim. He felt the rifle. The Winchester barked once, twice. The first shot took the man in the shoulder, spinning him out of the saddle. The second shot clipped the ear of Vane's horse. The stallion reared, screaming, and threw the gentleman into the Dakota mud. The third rider turned his horse and bolted. He wasn't paid enough to die for a brand. Silas Vane scrambled in the muck, his fine coat ruined, his hat gone. He looked up into the barrel of Elias's rifle. She's mine. Vane hissed, even now his pride a cancer. She belongs to herself, Elias said, stepping off the porch. He looked down at Vane with a pity that was colder than hatred. Go back to your camp. Silas, tell your men that the Black Hills are closed to you. If I see your shadow on this ridge again, I won't aim for the horse. Vane looked at the man on the ground, groaning and clutching his shoulder. He looked at Elias's eyes that had seen the end of the world and survived it. He didn't say another word. He climbed onto his horse, pulled his wounded man up, and rode into the dark. Elias stood in the yard until the sound of the hooves was swallowed by the wind. His heart was hammering, but his hands were steady. He walked back inside, pulled the rug aside, and opened the trapdoor. Sarah climbed out. She was shaking, but she wasn't crying. She looked at the door. She walked over to the table and picked up the lantern. She lit it, the light filling the room once more. She looked at Elias for a long time. Then she did something he didn't expect. She reached back and pulled the collar of her dress down, exposing the brand to the light. "It's still there," she said. "Scars are just stories, Sarah." Elias said softly. "They tell where you've been. They don't say where you're going. Tomorrow, we'll start fixing that fence. And maybe we'll plant some of those winter flowers Martha liked. They're tough. They grow right through the snow." She looked at him, and for the first time, the hollow look in her eyes began to fill with something else. Not hope, not yet, but a beginning. "Thank you, Elias." "Don't thank me," he said, turning back to the stove. "Just pass me that coffee pot. It's going to be a long winter, and we got a lot of work to do." In the Black Hills, the wind still screams. It remembers the ones who didn't make it. But in a small cabin on a ridge, two people found a way to bridge the silence. They found that while a brand can mark a person, it's the kindness of a stranger that truly defines them. Sometimes, the West is about the gunfights. But more often, it's about the person who keeps the lantern lit when the world is trying to blow it out. If this story meant something to you, if you believe that nobody is ever truly property, hit that like button. Subscribe to join us for the next journey into the wild heart of the West. Because out here, the stories never truly end.